right, welcome everyone to another episode of The Lockdown featuring our guest, the Vice President of Sportsnet and NHL production, Rob Corte. Rob, how's it going?
Pretty good, guys. How are you doing? Glad to be here.
Keeping it in. So obviously, since everything ended, it's June now and sports are slowly starting to come up, but there was nothing to fill the gap when, there was no sports. So what was your role in keeping Sportsnet producing content, and what kind of content were you looking to produce?
Sure. Well, there were a couple things. The first priority was to keep the lights on. We still have all these Sportsnet networks that we have to program for 24 hours a day. So our programming department needed a lot of help, and I look after the group that does the productions, a lot of the live event productions and studio shows. So what we were focused on was packaging a lot of the classic games. NHL Rewind, Blue Jays Rewind. We're still doing it now because we're still moving in through the summer. So a lot of our staff was focused on that, taking that stuff, cutting it down, and giving us as many hours of programming as possible so we could fill the day. And, it wasn't just a matter of putting whatever we could in. You wanted to have as much compelling content as possible. So there was a lot of meetings and thought about, obviously the Stanley Cup finals are important, but you try and pick important games that focused on some of the best stars or some great moments in Canadian sports. And then we've kind of continued that down that track. And right now we're doing a lot of Blue Jays and we're doing a lot of Rogers Cup tennis. So that was for the programming and the networks. But the other thing was, now it's time to experiment. Let's see what we can do, creating new content, using new technologies. And that's what you saw. So we started doing shows like Ron McLean's In Conversation, digital watch parties, a lot of Instagram live chats. We tried to take platforms that we used a little bit, but not really exploited, and tried to do as many things as we possibly could to keep our staff engaged, to entertain and inform, and also to showcase a lot of the athletes and personalities in sports. And I think that's a key takeaway from what's happened is we got a lot more access to players that we normally wouldn't get. So you saw Mitch Marner playing video games, and you saw a variety of players on Instagram Live, and working in conjunction with the leagues. You saw players front and center, and you got to learn a little bit more about them, whether it was they were introducing us to their moms for Mother's Day, or they were taking us through tours of their house, or you had the Kachuk brothers facing off, playing basketball and air hockey and whatever else, right? So that was a really good thing that happened, was the ability to get access to the players, showcase them, and then hopefully that's how it's going to continue as we move forward, because we all starve for that access, right? We want to know the players.
Was it difficult at all in the beginning when there was first that kind of shift, when basically almost every sports league either postponed their season or suspended their season? Was it difficult at first kind of transitioning and, doing things that you may not necessarily know would do well or not do well in terms of engagement?
100%. When it first happened, we all kind of looked at each other like, what are we going to do? Because you're right. You had work stoppages previously in one league, but to have everything go out, it was pretty scary. And of course, you also didn't know how long this would last, because it just, remember when the league started to shut down, things were just kind of starting. There were a couple people that were being diagnosed, and we didn't know the magnitude and what it was going to do to society and shut it all down. So yeah, no question, there was a lot of trepidation, a lot of like, oh my God, how are we going to handle this? But the good part of our business is a very creative business, and we've got a lot of creative people and a lot of thinkers. And when you have situations like this, and when you take away the parameters or the shackles maybe of your current work environment and how we do things, then you can open it up and say, let's try stuff. So that's what we did. And that was kind of the mandate, even from our president of Rogers Sports and Media, Jordan Banks. He said, I just want ideas. Throw out as many ideas as you can, and then we'll try. And some stuff worked, some stuff didn't work. But in the end, I think we were able to create a bunch of pretty good stuff.
No, it's so good. And it's so cool to see how you guys have been able to like pivot in the midst of all that. I'm just wondering, like, in your role, what was it like to lead in such a weird, confusing time? How did you manage, expectations for people, emotions, and leading a team of people? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was, one of the challenges was moving away from the way we've done things. And a lot of the new technology is great because you can do it from home, but it's slower. So when we were putting together, the ability to edit down a classic game, you might, in the edit suite, it might take you 2 hours. Like once you go through the game, it might take you 2 hours to do it. Now it might take you 10 hours because here's some of the edits. The editor works on their own. They send it back. Is this what I like? Well, change this, change that. And the process is slower. So keeping people's spirits up was a big part of this, because you had the unknown of how am I going to make this work? And it was a little bit of an inconvenience because, geez, you have to get past, wow, I could have done this in 2 hours. Now it's taking me 2 days. There's a little bit of that angst and frustration. Plus there's the uncertainty. Now people are working at home. You're worried about your jobs. You're worried about your health. You're separated from your family. There was a lot of anxiety. So it was really important to, as a leader, to reach out to individuals, talk to them, let them know we understand that this is frustrating and not ideal, but we're all in this together. And the one guiding principle that has been throughout from us at Rogers and Sportsnet, and also from most of the leagues and everybody we've been dealing with, is safety. We've told everybody, safety is the most important thing. Do not do anything if you're putting the health of yourself or your loved ones or your neighbor at risk. So once we let everybody know, look, safety comes first, your jobs are safe, now just go out and play, experiment. We still want you to do as good as you can. I think that took a lot of the pressure off. And then you started to really, after the first month or so, you really started to see the creative juices flowing because people were not concerned so much about those other things. And now let's get focused on the content.
I wanted to touch on the esports factor, especially when, like you said, you get to know the players and you had Mitch Marner playing. Are we going to see more of that once, sports leagues are back on TV? Do you think it's going to transition its way to television, or it's just going to be like on Twitch and stuff like that?
So it's funny. We've had this discussion internally for a few years now. And what we found is that esports on television do not work. We're showing the NBA 2K league. The viewership is extremely low. It's not an authentic platform for gamers. So as much as we've tried, we haven't had it work. And I think other networks have tried as well. It just hasn't worked. So I think you're going to, especially the hardcore gamers, we're actually in the process of putting together a show right now where we're going to have hockey players play against each other. It's hosted by Biz Nasty, Paul Bissonnette, and Sean McKenzie. And that's coming out probably in a couple weeks. That's going to be, the backdrop is the video game, but it's more about the conversation while the video games are happening. Watching two individuals go head to head in an intense competition, they're focused on the game. And I think you saw some of that stuff with the NBA. They put their own versions out really early when COVID-19 started, and the viewership was just not there. And you could see the players were less inclined to talk about their personal life or joke around because they wanted to win. And I just, on television, it hasn't translated well, and it hasn't been successful. So I don't know if that's the right platform for it. So far, it's shown that it hasn't been.
Yeah, I definitely think with esports, it just seems like it's always been more successful on streaming platforms like Twitch, like Mixer. But I want to ask, you were saying when everything first started and you were looking for new content, and there was a lot of just, like, let's try some stuff, and some stuff worked and some stuff didn't. Do you think there's anything that worked extremely well that you guys were kind of surprised about that you could see continuing over once COVID-19 is kind of said and done and all the sports leagues have returned?
Yeah, I think what works is when people can get together and gather. Probably the most successful thing we did was the Jose Bautista watch party. All right. And that we ended up putting it on television as well. And, when you have an event like that was just kind of galvanized the entire country, and everybody fondly remembers it. And then you're able to add Jose Bautista onto the show and get his thoughts firsthand. That really worked very well. And I think when you get information and you get kind of stories behind the stories, that really does well. Part of the challenge complaint you have with player interviews in, say, a regular game is you just get the cliched, we got to get pucks in deep and the power play has to do this and whatever. But when you're talking to athletes within their own homes, and when Bautista's recounting all the stuff that went into that, then you really get some really meaty stuff and some juicy stuff that you never hear. So I think regardless of platform or regardless of what it looks like, the ability to get that access to players and athletes and have them tell the stories away from kind of the constrictions of being within a broadcast and let them be themselves. I think that's, for me, the biggest takeaway. If we can continue that to happen, whatever platform we do it, I think that's going to be the biggest benefit out of all this.
As a fan, it's been cool to just see athletes open up their lives. It's been so cool to see them engage. But overall, I think everyone does want sports to come back, and live sports particularly. And the NHL is slowly trying to make a return in the summer. And the big conversation is, with no fans, we're going to pick up all the on-ice audio and the chirping between the players. Now, my understanding of, technical production is that you can just take the mics out and it won't be an issue. But is that something that, a conversation that's being had right now? Is Sportsnet and other networks going to allow that audio to actually get to broadcast, or is there going to be a contained effort to make sure that the chirping and potentially swearing and vulgar language doesn't get to broadcast?
That's been an absolute huge conversation. I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had with the league and the other broadcasters around that. And yeah, there's different camps. The reality is a lot of the language that happens on the ice is not for regular viewership. You just can't put that on, and the way it's going to look like in terms of the scheduling is you could have games in the afternoon all over the map, right? Because they've got so many games to fit in such a small time frame. That type of language, although people say, yeah, this will be great to hear it, when you actually start hearing it, it's not great. And I can't necessarily see the league and the NHL Players Association being open to having, putting their players and all that stuff that happens and is being said out to the public. But you have to, the NHL is an interesting one, because when action on the ice is happening, we can really amplify the rig sounds, the skates, the pucks, the sticks. Can we put extra microphones within the net so when the puck hits the crossbar or it hits the mesh, you really hear that? So when the game's on, there's not a lot of that kind of colorful language. You've all heard video. It's like, move the puck, glass, stuff like that. But it's when the whistles happen and then the scrums happen and then there's players are skating across in front of each other near the benches and the benches are chirping. That's the stuff that really gets offensive. And there is a worry that some of the language, which is not only inappropriate, but some of the stuff is offensive and shouldn't be said, could be heard. My take is, like, if it shouldn't be said, they shouldn't be saying it. So, trying to mask it, that's not the solution. The solution is that language should be out of the game. But I think you're going to see networks and the NHL, and let me clear, the NHL and the NHLPA has a big say in this. They're going to want it to be contained as best as possible. Stuff's going to slip through the cracks. That's fine. But I think a constant barrage of profanity, I don't think you're going to see it. And I don't think it's good for viewership. It's not good for kids to hear. And even as adults, to hear that constantly, it's not a good thing. It takes away from the game.
And you talked about your transition to working from home, and a lot of people are kind of in the same boat. In terms of like the sports world and from the production side, do you see a lot of the roles that have been forced to be done from a remote location continue to do that once people are able to go back into the workplace?
Yeah, there's going to be jobs. Not quite yet. We're not ready yet for live sports production to be done at home. There are being strides being made where there's systems that are cloud-based, and some of the networks in the United States have tested them out. They're not quite ready for prime time yet, but they're getting there, right? And as technology improves and the cloud storage and the cloud capabilities improve, you're going to get there. I think we're still, the live sporting events really still are quick decisions that happen in the moment, and you're there, right? It's like, go to this camera, go there, and you feed off the energy. You're a team that goes in to put out a game, and you feed off each other. Having everybody isolated in their home still it's just a different atmosphere. Technically, we're not quite there yet, but I think it's getting close. I just don't know if it's the right way to do it. If you're going to be able to convey the energy of a building when you're at home. And I'll give you an example. The old Northlands Coliseum in Edmonton, the TV truck used to park kind of underneath the stands. And when that building got rocking and the crowd was shaking, your truck would shake. Like, you would feel it. And you're part of something really big, and it just gets your adrenaline up. So having everybody at home, it's not quite the same.
I'm just wondering, like, you know, when you came to speak to us, I think around 2 years ago, you came to speak to our class. What really stood out to me was that, like, you are an example of someone who took your role as like a live producer and took it beyond into more of like an executive position, and opened doors in my head for like, oh, maybe that's something I could see myself doing way down the road. I'm wondering, what was that like process of going from being like a live event producer to then going on more of the admin executive side of sports broadcasting?
Yeah, it's interesting because it all happened pretty quickly for me, and it was around 2007. I was going to produce the Memorial Cup in Vancouver, and while I was there, the Olympic Committee reached out to me, and they were curious. They wanted to talk to me about the position of being the lead producer for the host feed of hockey in Vancouver, which would have been the gold medal game. So I was pretty excited about that. So I met with the individual, and then we had lunch again, and then he came to watch me in the truck a couple times, and he offered me the gig. He said, "I like what I see." He goes, "I think you'll do a great job. We'd like you to be our guy." And of course, I was over the moon, right? Because that's for a hockey producer, producing the gold medal game for the Olympics is one of the biggest things you can do. And at the time, Sportsnet and CBC weren't in any agreement, so Hockey Night in Canada was a separate network. So I wasn't going to get a chance to do Hockey Night unless I moved over to CBC. Well, around the same time, so I told my boss at the time about the offer, and he said, "Well, I want to talk to you about something else." And he said, "I'd like you to become the executive producer of all live sporting events at Sportsnet." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me! Like right now, like of all things." And the reality is I couldn't do both. And it was a hard decision because I did, I didn't feel like I had reached my pinnacle yet in producing. I was still learning, I was still growing, and I was still going to get opportunities like the Olympics. But it's also a life that takes you on the road and you're traveling a lot. And I remember talking it over with a lot of people, and then the opportunity to move into management doesn't come very often. There's very few jobs. And then for me, it was always, look, if I went into this and it didn't work out, I still was young enough, because I was 35 at the time, to get an opportunity to go somewhere, produce somewhere else, or even go back to producing at Sportsnet. And so so I decided, probably for the long-term good, this is what, I'm going to give this a try as an executive producer, knowing that maybe my producer days were over. And once I got into that gig, then you start learning so many other parts of the business, the budgets, human resources. There's so many things that I had no idea existed. It was funny because as you're kind of like, sometimes there's a bit of a divide. There's the workers and there's the management. And when you're on the worker side, there's so many decisions that get made. You're kind of like, I don't understand this. Why are they doing this? What a dumb decision. And then when you get on the other side, now you see all the other reasons why decisions are made, and the kind of light bulb went on, go, okay, I get this now. I see other parts of the business. So I actually really enjoyed it. And then, so from there, as every year would go on, I missed producing more and more, but I would find when I would go in the truck, the bug was still there, like that adrenaline rush. You just don't get that from management that you would get producing live events. But the benefits of management and how much I enjoyed it over time outweighed more and more being a producer. And so, in the end, I was happy with my decision. And, I was the executive producer until 2011. Then I became a vice president. And through the vice presidents, I was looking after various things like news and live events and hockey and Tim and Sid and things like that. So yeah, I don't regret it at all. It's just, I've never been able to duplicate that same rush of live television. We're live in 10, 9, 8, those butterflies, and then executing and having a great show. There's nothing in management that compares to that.
Final serious question before we ask you our wrap-up question. So Sportsnet picks up the Bundesliga. How crucial was it to beat your competitors to get the first live sport that is basically watched worldwide?
Well, it's interesting. We had the rights to Bundesliga. So we had always had the rights to it. It's just, it had been a Sportsnet World property on our pay service. And so when Bundesliga announced that they were coming back, well, perfect, we have it. So it just made natural sense to move it on to linear television and to, onto cable, as opposed to taking it off Sportsnet World. So I don't think it, those thoughts of being the absolute first to have the first live sporting event, those of us in the business know a lot of it is timing. And we were just fortunate enough to have Bundesliga at the time, the rights to it, and so we put it on the air. But it wasn't like a mad dash to be the first one.
One last question before we let you go. Things are slowly starting to open up, but once everything is completely back to normal, what's the first thing you want to do? What do you miss the most?
Well, you know what? I miss having pints with my buddies, to be honest with you, just hanging around with your buds and having pints on a patio or whatever. You know, I know you can social distance it right now, but it's not the same. It's not the same, right? So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm a big golfer, so I've been fortunate enough to golf, and I golf with my son quite a bit and friends. That's good, but just you know what? It's just the freedom. I think the freedom to move around as you see fit, and also to be able to do it with not having to second guess yourself. I don't know how you guys are, but I still find myself, I'll go to a store and I step out of the car. I'm like, oh, I forgot my mask, right? Things that I never thought about before. Or you walk up to a door knob and you're like, how am I going to open the door here? I don't have gloves. What am I supposed to do, right? So do you go back and get wipes and wipe that and wipe your hands? It's just that stuff is, you know, you just, to some degree, you don't feel entirely free to kind of live your life as you normally would. And I guess that sense of normalcy is kind of what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect answer. I think all the time about like grabbing groceries and bringing them back in, and my mom like yell in my ear, you know, wipe down everything, make sure that, or even seeing friends and feeling weird about like not being able to shake their hand. All that stuff is just, I agree. Being able to go back to normal will be very good. But Rob, we know you're a very busy guy. We want to thank you for coming on the show and taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, guys. It was great. Best of luck. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and hopefully we're through this soon and back to, like we talked about, back to the normal way of life.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Thank you.
See ya.